now turn it over to our final presenter of the morning and of our entire session, which is Christine Schultz. She'll be presenting her thesis work on reducing e-waste on campus, an investigation of cell phone replacement and disposal among university students. Her thesis advisor is Jason Duvall in Program in the Environment, and her reader is me. So I will turn it over to Chris.
Thank you so much. Let me share my screen real quick. Can you all see it?
Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you. So yes, thank you all for coming to watch my presentation today. Like Shelley said, my title is called Reducing E-Waste on Campus. It's an investigation of cell phone replacement and disposal among university students. I want to start off by thanking everyone who's watching and thanking my thesis advisor, Jason, who's helped me out a lot through this process. I don't think I could have done it without him. And thanking my reader, Shelley. She hasn't read anything yet because I haven't given her anything to read, but once I finish my thesis, I know she'll be super helpful. So I'm going to start off with a little overview, some background on phone consumption, and then I'll get into why I decided to study students and why students are an interesting population to study, and then get into my research and some concluding statements about future implications of my study. So let's see. So some background information. Phones started becoming popular in the 1980s, and we can see from the images in the bottom, we can see the rapid phone development that's happened over the years. The graph in the top shows the mobile cellular subscriptions per 100 people for the United States and the world, and you can see the rapid increase in phone consumption that's happened since the 1980s, and that still continues to happen today. So this created a culture of consumption, which has a lot of factors that influence it to continue it today, including marketing pressure, consumer demand, network provider contracts, and manufacturers. All of this creates, it makes it so cell phones are known to have the shortest product lifetime of any electronic item, and they are replaced every 1 to 2 years approximately. A 2011 study reported that 60% of sales are replacement sales, while 90% of the old phones were still functioning when they were replaced. This can create a lot of waste for, it can create a lot of e-waste for cell phones, which has a large environmental impact. So I'm going to talk about two different aspects of environmental impact that phones have. So the first is global warming potential. So life cycle assessments on phones are conducted where they look at the raw material acquisition, the production, the use, the transportation, and the disposal of the phone. This particular study was extra thorough, and they also looked at the accessories and the network usage, and they concluded that a phone over a 3-year span will emit around 120 kilograms of CO2, which is approximately the equivalent of driving a car 300 miles, or the amount of carbon sequestered by 2 trees after 10 years of growth. This graph on our right shows that production is the predominant global warming emitter for this for a phone's life cycle, and the smallest bar at the end there, that's disposal of the phone. And while it seems to not play a huge part in the global warming potential, it still has a large environmental impact due to all of the materials that are contained in a phone. So the other side of the environmental impact is the valuable materials that phones contain. So phones contain around 40 different elements, all of which are listed as potentially critical raw materials by the European Union. And all of these elements make it so that phones are the most valuable electronic product found in large numbers in today's waste stream. So not only are these elements valuable, but they can also be very toxic to ecosystems and to humans. When they're not disposed of properly, the toxic elements in the phones can leach into the air and into the ground and really disturb ecosystems, but it can also potentially leach into groundwater, which would harm humans. The valuable elements and the toxicity of these phones make it vital that they're disposed of properly. However, only around 10% of phones are actually recycled, mostly due to a lack of awareness, knowledge, and infrastructure. Most phones end up actually being just stockpiled. So if you look at the chart on the screen, it shows you raw materials and energy go in, and then after just a few years of use, outputs, we just get some waste and some emissions. Each stage of the life cycle has its own costs, and it would be great if we could figure out a stage at which intervention would be the most appropriate to try and lessen the impact of our phone consumption on the environment. So what role do students play, and why did I decide to study them, and why are they important to this issue? So students actually have the highest levels of phone ownership and replacement, and they typically are the fastest to adopt new technology. They typically replace their phones at least once a year, and 77% are reported to keep their phones as a spare, their old phones as a spare, so they're stockpiling. Students are also in the process of forming their long-term consumption habits, and also are a group that's more likely to think about the environmental and social impacts of their purchases versus older generations. Universities can also play a role in trying to prevent this, stockpiling through some of their take-back programs. Universities have started to recognize this behavior as an issue, and including U of M has created a take-back program. However, that might not be enough to truly change the behavior of students. So for my research, I had two different components of it. I had replacement and use, as well as disposal. So for replacement, the questions I was asking were, how often do students replace their phones, as well as what factors influence their decisions to replace, trying to see if there's an issue on campus, and if so, how big is it? For disposal, I was asking, what do students do with their old phones, as well as what factors influence their decision of what to do with their old phone, such as if their past environmental actions are likely to determine their disposal decisions in the future. To do this, I conducted an online survey that was distributed to university students. Some of the variables I looked at were demographics such as age and income, cell phone ownership, usage, and disposal history, phone replacement motives, knowledge of phone recycling programs, and pro-environmental attitudes and behavior. After collecting the data, I calculated some descriptive statistics about the population, as well as did a factor analysis, which was used to reduce data and create broader categories that were used in the linear models. And the linear models were used as a way to predict the factors that are involved in replacement and disposal behavior. So here are some of the descriptive statistics. The majority of my sample was female with a relatively high income and have replaced their phones between 1 to 3 times in their life. Around 77% reported owning at least one unused phone, and it's important to note that most students said that their cell phone plan isn't managed by them, it's managed by somebody else. Over 80% reported not being aware of a recycling program on their campus, but 65% said that they would be willing to participate in one if there was one. The graph on the left shows the types of disposal that people reported having done in the past, such as so the majority, as we can see here, kept their phones, showing that stockpiling behavior yet again. Okay, so I created around 8 linear models. 2 were for the replacement behaviors and 6 were for disposal. And the replacement models showed no significant results. And so I believe that that's a reflection of the fact that the majority of students aren't the ones making their managing their phone plan, so they're likely not the ones making their replacement decisions. But the disposal models ended up having some significant results, so I was going to present some of those here. So we're looking at the independent variables, trying to predict the dependent variables. So in this case, it's number of old phones currently in their possession. Age was shown to have to negatively predict the number of phones currently in possession, meaning that the younger a student is, the number of old phones they have is greater. Everyday behaviors such as recycling and using a reusable water bottle were shown to negatively predict the number of old phones, meaning that those with low involvement environmental behaviors are typically going to have a lower number of old phones. And someone who has a lack of knowledge regarding how to properly dispose of their phone was more likely to have a higher number of phones in their possession. for the likelihood of participation in a campus recycling program. Those who were higher income tended to be less likely. Those who had high involvement behaviors, such as attending an environmental event, tended to be more likely to participate, and those who had knowledge about the impact of e-waste tended to be more likely to participate. So what does this mean? What are the future implications of this? Ultimately, we want to try and decrease the total number of phones produced while increasing the number of phones being reused or recycled due to their negative environmental and social impact. Since students' behaviors are so moldable at this stage in their lives, it would be nice to try to be able to impact their replacement behaviors. However, it was shown that around 88% of them aren't even in charge of their own phone plans, so they likely aren't the ones making their replacement decisions. Instead, there should be more of a focus on changing students' behaviors at the disposal level, and I think universities would be a very effective and efficient way to do this. So I think universities would be very interested in being involved in this, partially due to the fact that most have sustainability goals that they're trying to meet. So U of M sustainability goals include reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 25%, reducing the amount of waste sent to landfills by 40%, and investing in programs to educate the community to be more sustainable. And like I said, most universities already have take-back programs, such as U of M has one also, but my survey results reported that over 80% of students weren't even aware that this take-back program existed, while 77% ended up having at least one phone they weren't using that could potentially be disposed of. If universities were to increase their efforts towards getting students to reuse or recycle their phones, I think it could really boost their sustainability goals. So to put things in perspective, if I generalize my results to the entirety of the campus and say that a majority of students have at least one unused phone at home, and there's around 45,000 students on campus, we can estimate that there's approximately 45,000 unused phones out there that have the potential to be reused or recycled. And if each phone has a life cycle, a global warming potential of around 120 kilograms of CO2, then through U of M collecting phones on campus, they have the potential to reduce emissions by around 5.5 million kilograms of CO2. And using my earlier analogy, it equates to approximately 13.5 million miles driven, or the amount of carbon that 89,000 trees can sequester over 10 years. Some ways the university could go about changing behavior is through more clear and effective communication and education on the impacts of e-waste and the proper way to dispose of their phones. My linear models showed how those who were more educated about e-waste tended to be more likely to participate, and those who were less educated about how to dispose of their phone were more likely to stockpile them. Another way to try and motivate students to reuse or recycle their phones would be an economic incentive, including getting money when they take back their phones, or creating a cheap resale market as a way to promote reuse of cell phones. So this is the model I showed in the beginning, showing this very linear type model of raw materials and energy in, and then mostly just waste and emissions out. And so this is what the cycle is right now: raw materials to production, to transportation, to use, to disposal or stockpiling. With the actions that I mentioned just before about what the university could do to help this, they could potentially be involved in the disposal behaviors of students and change this waste end of life to be more reuse and refurbishment and repurposing of the phones. And this could change the model to be more sustainable in now that after reuse, it goes right back to use, and it can, we skip over the raw materials, the production, the transportation. And when the phone is no longer able to be used, the materials of the phone, the valuable elements that I mentioned, can all be recycled and returned back to the production stage, where we can skip over the raw material acquisition. This already creates a more cyclical kind of lifestyle for phones to have, and it creates a more sustainable cycle for reuse, resource reuse, and recycling of phones. So ultimately, my data is confirming that there's an issue on campus, and that there's a way for universities to help. So even though there's a pretty big issue of phone stockpiling and phone disposal behavior on campus, it leaves a great opportunity to create big change. And that's it.
Great. Thanks so much, Christine, for an excellent presentation. I look forward to actually reading the results. With that, I'll open it up for some questions from the audience.
Christine, I'm curious if there was any like interest or like questions in your survey for students like keeping their phones a little bit longer than they normally would, like if they were more environmentally minded. Like, is that something you looked at all, or would be, have some knowledge about?
Yeah, are you asking like if I studied whether students who were more environmentally oriented were more likely to keep their phones?
Yeah, or if any of them expressed like that they would keep their phone longer.
So with running my linear models, we didn't really end up seeing any significance between much significance between students like environmental behaviors and their like willingness to keep their phones longer, or their like replacement time. Like it showed that mostly students still, even with their past environmental actions or awareness, still kind of kept their phones the same amount of time.
That's
Is that what you were asking?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that answers my question.
Yeah, it was interesting because that was a big like hypothesis I had going in, is that those who are more environmentally aware would, be more environmentally aware about their phones too. But it seems like this is an issue that even if you're environmentally aware in general, you might not be thinking about it in terms of your phone.
So I had a question for you, Christine, about, and this is something you and I have talked about a little bit. You kind of came up with this idea of some kind of a refurbishment program, right? To be able to keep phones kind of usable phones in the system, right? And have reduce some of these other impacts. But I'm struck by the fact that some of your results in some ways like speak to that, the fact that that might be a limited kind of a strategy, right? Because if students are not actually the ones that are in control of the replacement decisions, like how much of an impact would like a refurbishment resale program even have?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not quite sure, because you're right, they're not necessarily the ones in control of their replacement decisions, but potentially it could at least give them a way to trade in their phones, so that those who maybe are in charge of their replacement decisions can make that move, or also potentially those who aren't in control of their replacement decisions as of now, they might give them an opportunity to become in control of them if they can afford the phone that they are paying for. Or if we educate students about the importance of reusing and recycling and the impacts of e-waste, students might be more willing and more, they might have a higher desire to try and buy a phone that has been used already once. So there might be a bigger demand for that kind of resale type of market on campus.
Great. And so, Christine, I'll call your attention to Ashley Mark's question in the comments, which is, are all of the resources and minerals used in a phone able to be drawn back out and reused in new phones, or only certain components?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in my research, it seemed like, I don't think that you can always reuse all the resources in a phone, but every, with technology advancing, like the methods for reusing and recycling are advancing too. So every year they're getting better at being able to take out and reuse a little bit more of each material. So I know, for instance, Apple has they have a little mechanical arm named Daisy, and it can specifically on specific iPhone models, it can very carefully extract materials to try and get the most reuse out of phones that you possibly can, and get the most materials out of it. So ultimately it's getting better and better every year, and I think that for the most part, there can be a great amount that is taken out and reused, a very significant amount.
Great. Well, excellent. Well, thank you very much. We virtually applaud your work. Very nice job and great presentation.
Thank you so much.
And so with that, that actually ends our honors thesis presentations. Thank you all for your hard work, advisors, readers, and of course the students themselves who have put an incredible amount of effort over the past year into creating some really great products. And so congratulations to you all. Be sure to check out the graduation ceremonies tomorrow. I hope you have a beautiful rest of this lovely Friday and are able to get outside a little bit. So I will end there. Go Blue. Hopefully we'll see you all soon. See ya.